Okay, kiddos. Here go answers to our daylight cycle practice quiz. Okay, so we've been learning about the daylight cycle, and this is an appropriate time to talk about it because we just went through daylight savings time and the spring equinox. So we're asked about the sort of 4 specific days within the year: spring equinox, summer solstice, fall equinox, and then winter solstice. So read through these. Spring equinox is the day when there's 12 hours of daylight and 12 hours of darkness everywhere on Earth, and that happens sometime around March 21st. It can be like the 20th or the 23rd or something like that, but if you just say it's around March 21st, that's great. Summer solstice is the longest day of the year. Okay, summer, longest day of the year. So in the northern hemisphere, that's where we are. That happens around June 21st. If you were in the southern hemisphere, the summer solstice would be December 21st. Fall equinox, so it's similar to spring equinox, okay, except the daylight would be decreasing at that point. So there's 12 hours of daylight and 12 hours of darkness everywhere on Earth, including here in Mammoth. And fall equinox will happen around September 21st. So 2 pieces of information you need to know for these. How much daylight is there? Like, is it the longest day, shortest day, or middle day? And then when is it? So fall equinox, September 21st. Summer solstice, June 21st. Spring equinox, March 21st. And then lastly, winter solstice, which would be shortest day of the year, happening December 21st. Each of these is 3 months apart. Next up, Earth orbits the Sun in an almost circular orbit. Why do we have seasons? So this is a big question. Why do we have seasons? Okay, and if you say, well, the Earth is tilted, that's partially correct, but it's definitely not completely correct. So I'd like to see a diagram. We have the Sun, and the axis of rotation of Earth is tilted. It's not straight up and down. It's tilted to the side. And notice how, let's zoom in here. Notice how it's tilted to the side in the same direction. So in June, when the Sun is over here, this side of Earth is facing the Sun. So the northern hemisphere is sort of tilted towards or facing the Sun, whereas the southern hemisphere is sort of facing away from it. And then 6 months later, so that's 6 months, that would be a whole year. 6 months, another year. 6 months, another year, as the Earth goes around the Sun. 6 months later, in December, you see how the southern hemisphere is sort of facing the Sun, and then the northern hemisphere is facing away from the Sun. So at this time of year, in December, North Pole people, they'd be in complete darkness. Whereas South Pole people, they would be in complete light, 24 hours of daylight. Over here in June, North Pole people would be completely in sun, and South Pole people would be completely in darkness. So, what do we say to describe this? The Earth's axis of rotation is tilted, okay? So the northern hemisphere faces the Sun in June, whereas the southern hemisphere faces the Sun in December. So this is why northern hemisphere has summer in June, and southern hemisphere has summer in December. So, to apply this, when a country such as the United States in the northern hemisphere is experiencing winter, what season is it in Australia, which is in the southern hemisphere? So, if we're in the north and it's summer, in the south it'd be winter. Seasons are reversed, they're opposites. If it's spring here, it's fall there. If it's winter here, it's summer there, etc. And this is because the southern hemisphere would be facing away from the Sun. So if we look back at our diagram, over here, north faces the Sun, south doesn't. Over here, the north faces away from the Sun, the south faces towards the Sun. And so at this location and at this location, these would be the equinoxes, okay, where everywhere on Earth would experience 12 hours of daylight. So the United States and Australia would experience the same amount of daylight at these times, okay? But for one of us, we'd be going from summer into winter, and for the other one, we'd be going from winter into summer. So one of us would be experiencing spring, and the other would be experiencing fall, even though we would both be experiencing 12 hours of daylight at either the spring equinox or fall equinox. When it is July in the United States, what month is it in Australia? Ha ha ha, trick question. And what season is it in Australia? So July is July everywhere, okay? The whole world subscribes to the same calendar, basically. So if it's July 21st, well, if it's July, it's going to be July everywhere. There is an international date line, because as the Earth rotates, we have to say, well, when does it turn from July 21st to July 22nd? But we all subscribe to the same calendar. The seasons, however, will be different. So if it were July, it'd be summer in the northern hemisphere and winter in the southern hemisphere. Okie doke, let's take a look at page 2. All right, so page 2, here's a couple mammoth-specific pieces of information. The longest day of the year is approximately 14 hours and 45 minutes. So I know I'm not that big on memorization, but if you memorize this just so you have a ballpark figure in your head, I think that's an important piece of information, seeing as how we live here. And it's beautiful outside, so we like to be outside a whole lot. And during summer, we have lots of time to actually do that when it's light outside and not dark. Number 9, what is the shortest day, approximately? And so in winter, we like the snow and all that, but the reality is there's only 9 hours and 34 minutes of daylight. So it's sort of more difficult to get out and enjoy the snow unless you like to go out and enjoy the snow in the dark. 10, where and when on Earth do people experience 24 hours of daylight? Something that I have not seen but would like to. So, near the North Pole, okay, above the Arctic Circle, so Arctic Circle, that's one of those latitude lines far towards the north. Near the North Pole, around the summer solstice, and that would be our summer solstice, the Northern Hemisphere summer solstice, meaning June 21st. So, around this time of the year, around this location of Earth, you have 24 hours of daylight. So, the farther south you go, the less of the 24 hours of daylight you're actually going to see. On the bottom of the Earth, so near the South Pole, okay, around our winter solstice, which would be their summer solstice, which would be December 21st, people and penguins in the South Pole would experience 24 hours of daylight. Okay. So, 12. Season winter. And this is, if you look at your graph, so check out your notes and look at your graph that looks like this, okay, the actual daylight cycle graph, you would kind of think that winter would be centered around the winter solstice, but it's not. The winter solstice actually brings in or begins winter. So winter goes from December 21st to March 21st. You could be more specific and add some information here by saying winter lasts from the winter solstice to the spring equinox. And then you would just be super specific and smart. Our next question says the season spring lasts from, so knowing these dates is good, but spring begins at the spring equinox and ends at the summer solstice. Okay. Summer lasts from, it's not centered around the summer solstice, it begins at the summer solstice. So the longest day of the year is when summer actually starts, technically. So it begins at the summer solstice and ends at the fall equinox. And lastly but not leastly, the season of fall will begin at the fall equinox. That's an I, equinox, and end at the winter solstice. Okay. So, what do I say over here? It changes from exactly the 21st, from the 20th to the 23rd or so. Right, so I'm using the 21st there because that's a common date on which these days fall, but it's sometime around then, and it'll vary by a couple days year to year and whatnot. So, number 16, on your graph paper, create a graph. So we've done this. Take a look at your graph. It should be very detailed. You should have things listed like equinox, solstice, and then seasons, summer, fall, winter, spring, number of hours of daylight. It should be a nice smooth graph that kind of looks like this. Okay, and if you're making a graph, if it takes up the entire page, that's good. Okay, unfortunately we had the situation like something like this, where here's your graph paper and the graph's like this. That's not cool. We don't want to waste all that space. We would prefer that it looked something like that. Okay, so that's it. Until next time.